You talked about like running Windows slaves, like throwing labels of Windows and Mac, right? So let's say one of the slave went down, and it was when I was taking up the job, and it would be a bell failure at that point. Would it be smart enough to actually queue up those jobs that is sitting on the failed node to actually route it to another node?
Let's see. By now you might be getting a queue, but the answer is there exists a plugin for that.
Oh, yeah.
It's possible that someone wrote a plugin that if it detects a failure, it tries to rebuild a few times and so on. So yeah, you can do those things.
What are the major sync points in the workflow that you can insert a plugin? I mean, is it anywhere within the workflow of Hudson?
So there's a wiki page that captures the list of all the extension points that we've got. It covers all the major things, like let's say the SCM support is a big extension point. The build tool support is another, but there is just I think there is maybe 30 or 40 different extension points that you could hook into. So so the extensibility is quite nicely done, I think.
In your experience, do people who use a lot of Selenium nodes tend to run many clients for one server, or do they tend to have a one-to-one relationship of a browser to a web app instance so that the database state isn't affected by running tests that are running concurrently, depending on the application?
Okay, so the browsers, running multiple browsers on a single node is okay in that context. So yeah, I think you're worrying more about the other exclusive resources like database access. So for controlling the database is a good example that you have, or another good example is the TCP/IP port. So sometimes people hard code the test to use a particular port. So if you're running, let's say if you have a nice quad-core system, so it's capable of running, let's say 2 or 3 builds at the same time. But if it just so happens to run 2 tests that both need the port 8080, they break. So again, there exists a plugin for that. It sort of lets you control the TCP. So if you tell Hudson that this test needs these ports, it will honor those constraints and when it does the scheduling. You can also tell Hudson to allocate the port number for the build. If you actually write the build script that could take the port number from outside, then you could tell this plugin to allocate the unique port number and do the right thing. So you could do those things. And then by using, there's also additional those exclusion control mechanisms that you can use to make sure that no 2 tests aren't touching at the same database at the same time, or so that's how people seems to do it.
And what is that one?
So the one that does the TCP port allocation is port allocator. There's another one that does this locking called locks and latches plugin, and I'm sure there are 2 or 3 more that some of them might be relatively decent than others.
So do you take it upon yourself to vet these plugins and do something to assure their reliability and that they meet your coding standards, et cetera?
So I guess this sort of came from so there's a downside in this design, but the sort of choice in the Hudson community is to let the higher degree of autonomy in each plugin. So people can contribute plugins and they can have all kinds of coding standards of their choice, or the way that the particular test framework of their choice, and that's fine by us. So one of the things like I find painful is that when I contribute someone else's project, they often have those stringent rules like, I have to have a white space after a comma, or the function cannot go beyond 30 lines, or that sort of crazy constraints, and it really sort of puts me off. And so I thought, well, if I'm getting put off, then I'm sure there are other people in the same boat. So, at the cost of having less than ideal quality plugins, we sort of chose to have a larger number of plugins. So so there is no there really isn't anything enforced.
Just to follow up with that, because I've heard this talked about before with people who use a lot of Hudson plugins, is there any plan to make a review system so people can see, I like this plugin, or I don't like this, it's got some bugs, so there's some kind of way of deciding before you try to use it yourself?
Yeah, right. So this is one of the obvious ideas that needs to be implemented. like some kind of community review system where they could vote up and vote down. There needs to be some way of like testing the compatibility between different versions of plugins and different versions of Hudson. Some of those things is in what. So I'm planning to work on some of those in the context of my company, but I think in some other things that I hope someone in the community would actually join and do some implementation. So.
In regards to that last comment, have you ever given serious regard to using the add-ons Mozilla.org platform for that?
Mozilla.org platform for what?
For hosting the Hudson plugins, because that'll give you an ecosystem of ratings and things like that, reviews and.
So that's interesting. So how can I take advantage of that? Yes.
You can email me and I'll get you in touch with the right people.
Okay. I'm glad I came.